Good morning. Guys, I'm going to say this again. We live in a messed up world, right? I mean, it's a little redundant. We've said that quite a bit. We know that just looking at news headlines, listening to the radio. It's ridiculous, and it gets a little bit depressing, doesn't it? I mean, just hearing how messed up stuff is, it gets a little bit depressing. It is a great thing this week that our shutdown is over, isn't it? No matter which side of that issue you're on, and I'm not going to pick a side, we're not going to do that this morning, but no matter what side of that issue you were on, can we all agree that it was a bad deal? I mean, it was messed up, no matter what you thought. And if you just look at other stories, you see tons of other things that you can just say, man, that's messed up. That's a bad deal. And I'm not going to get into politics this morning. I will kind of give you, here's my thing with all of this politics. If the Bible clearly speaks on it, then we should be able to clearly speak on it without shame or fear this morning. Otherwise, we can remain silent. But regardless, what we must understand today is that just by changing governments and laws, we're not going to change hearts of people. I mean, we need to understand that in our society. Even we looked last week at how broken God's people are, and we looked last week, God gave the people, a broken people, a law, and even God's law couldn't save and fix the brokenness. So why do sometimes we think that our American laws can save or fix brokenness? It's not how it's done. And we're going to see that this morning, that our brokenness isn't fixed by something that's by that. But when you do look at the world, you do see how messed up and broken we are. And I know it sounds like a broken record. As I was preparing for this and as I was telling Stacy, I'm like, man, we're saying the same thing again and again, but I think that's okay because our brokenness is everywhere and we do need to address it. You see it everywhere. And sometimes, I think one way that we try to make ourselves feel better with our brokenness is sometimes we say, well, it hasn't always been that way. We'll say things like, well, maybe if we can get back to the good old days, maybe if it can be like it was when I was a kid, maybe we can make America great again. You know, all these things, it can get back to the way it used to be when it wasn't so broken. Well, I have news for you this morning. We've always been broken. Always. I don't know if you remember the first time, the first week we started the series, we looked at Adam and Eve. They were broken. And ever since then, it hasn't changed. So we've always been a broken people. And when you read through the Bible, that doesn't change. As we go through this series, I'm really wanting, we have this week and next week left. And I'm really just wanting to drive home this point that God is working with His broken people. That we are broken people, but we are still God's people. So every week, we've been looking into a person in the Bible. All of them are broken, except for God. Every person in the Bible is broken. This week, we're going to look at Samson. I know, we were going to look at Abraham, but we switched it up a little bit. We're going to look at the life of Samson. What kind of man was Samson? Good man, many of you may say. You know that famous saying, actions speak louder than words? Well, let's look at some of Samson's actions, shall we? See, Samson, so first of all, early on in his life, Samson wanted a wife. Who doesn't? I mean, everyone wants a wife until they get one. Anyway, I can't say that yet, can I? Probably not.
It might get you in trouble.
But Samson decided he wanted a wife. In chapter 14 of Judges, we're told that Samson found a woman in a neighboring town of Timnah, and he decided he wanted to marry her. Samson goes, he tells his mom and dad, hey, I found a girl, and I want to go pick out a ring for her, right? I mean, they didn't really pick out rings, but you get the point. He said, I found this woman that I want to marry. And then, it's throughout this story that we get the first look at Samson's strength. So he was going to his bride-to-be's hometown. And on his trip, this lion came out of nowhere, ready to eat him. Now, I don't know about you this morning, but if you're a betting person and you see a man going up against a lion, I'm putting all of my money on the line. And I'm probably going to leave with a lot of money, right? But that's not what played out here. We see Samson's great strength for the first time. He's able with his bare hands to kill this lion. So he kills this hungry lion. Sometimes later, he makes his trip just fine. Sometime later, he's going back. And as he's going back, he passes this dead lion that he had killed the last trip. And in this lion now is honey. And he says, I like honey. Honey's good, isn't it? I'm going to eat me some honey. So he goes into this carcass of this lion, and he eats this honey. But what you may not realize in this story is that was against the law. The law that we saw last week was given to the broken people to, try to limit their brokenness and tell them some stuff to do and not to do. Well, in Leviticus chapter 11, it says all the animals that walk on all fours, those that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening. Samson would have known this law. But he clearly wasn't too concerned with keeping the law of Moses, the law that was given to them to try and limit their brokenness. He obviously didn't care too much for it. He blatantly disregards it. And so what we see is this cycle of brokenness, this cycle of sin. It's continuing. Samson was a man that couldn't keep the law. Does that sound a little bit like you this morning? Can we say you are a man that can't? Can we say Cody is a man that can't keep the law? I think that could be true of all of us, could it not? That's why in Romans 3, Paul says, therefore no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law we become conscious of our sin. We're all men who can't keep the law. So Samson, like us, couldn't do this. Samson was also, if you keep reading through his story, a violent man. He was a man of violence and anger, a man prone to anger. The story told in Judges of Samson, I think, would make a pretty cool Chuck Norris movie. You guys watch Chuck Norris movies or hear those corny Chuck Norris jokes? They're pretty awful, right? I have some in here. Stacy told me I shouldn't read them because they're so bad. But we're going to anyways. We'll let you guys be the judge. At least laugh at how bad they are, even if they're not funny, okay? Instead of Chuck Norris, though, we're gonna put Samson's name in here. There used to be a street named after Samson, but they had to change the name because no one crosses Samson and lives. Samson's been to Mars, and that's why now they say there's no life on Mars. And they're going to kill everyone. The last one, my favorite one. Samson and Superman once had an arm wrestling contest, and they agreed that the loser would have to wear their underwear on the outside of their pants. I was told if I have to explain my jokes, they're not funny. So I'll stop trying. But the fact remains that Samson, he was a scary dude. He really was. He was this angry, violent, rageful dude. But at his wedding, he ends up getting ready to marry this woman that he found, the same woman he was going to visit when this lion situation happened. And he told a riddle to 30 Philistine men. And he told them, if you solve this riddle, I'll give you 30 sets of clothes. Well, they wanted to win this. They wanted to solve this riddle, so they go and they threaten his bride-to-be. They say, listen, we know you know the answer, or at least you can get it. What is the answer to this riddle? Ends up, they get it from her. If you can imagine, this doesn't go over very well with Samson. In Judges chapter 14 and verse 19, after this situation, it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, Samson, and he went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of them and took their spoil and gave the changes of clothes to those who he told the riddle. And his anger burned, and he went up to his father's house. So after this situation where they threatened his bride-to-be to cheat on him and get his answer, he gets mad, he goes, kills a bunch of people, and runs off. This rageful man, violent man. Samson was a broken man. This keeps becoming evident as you continue in his story. So he was a man who loved to get even. So after this situation, he ran away from his bride-to-be. He ran to his father's house. But when he came back, he wanted his bride, right? Well, his to-be father-in-law, the father of the woman who he was going to marry before this took place, was not a very smart man in the sense of he gave his daughter to another man when Samson was gone. So Samson comes back for his wife, just to find out his wife has been given to another man, and to make it worse, the man that his wife-to-be had been given to was a friend of his, or at least supposed to be a friend of his. I mean, this would make anyone angry, but for Samson, this was just terrible. So he wants to get even, right? This is where you see one of the coolest parts of the Samson story. So he comes back, finds out that his wife's been given to another man. And read what happens in Judges chapter 15. Later on, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. "I want to go to my wife in her room," he said, but the father would not let him enter. "I was sure you would thoroughly hated her," said the father, "so I gave her to one of the men who accompanied you. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she is? Please take her instead." He's really trying to get on Samson's good side. "Please don't be mad at me." He said, "Take her instead." Then Samson said to them, "This time I will be blameless in doing harm to the Philistines." Then Samson went out and caught 300 foxes. He took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, tied the torches between each pair of tails, then lit the torches, released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines, burning up the piles of grain and standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. Ooh, he made a scene, didn't he? He was upset. And he wanted to hurt the people who had hurt him. He was vengeful. Samson wanted to get even. He was a man who loved to get even. They asked Samson later on, they said, "Why do you do this? Why do you attack the Philistine? What was the purpose of this?" And he had a pretty simple answer. In verse 11 of Judges 15, he says, "I merely did to them what they did to me." He said, "They hurt me, I hurt them," right? He was just trying to get even. The story keeps getting better. After this, Samson had a showdown with 1,000 men who were chasing him. So they're mad that he burned down all their stuff, and so 1,000 men are chasing after him. He picks up a jawbone and he fights off the 1,000 men. This is a powerful dude, isn't it? Fights off these 1,000 men, and then he's thirsty. And after he sees how God can strengthen him to fight 1,000 men, right after that he loses faith and doesn't even think God's going to give him water. Look at verse 18 of Judges 15. So after this fight, it says, of being very thirsty, after you fought 1,000 men, wouldn't you be thirsty? After being very thirsty, Samson cried out to the Lord, "You've accomplished this great deliverance through me, your servant. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" He says, after all this, you're going to really not even give me a drink? This morning, sometimes it's hard to believe God is going to do something when you don't see it, isn't it? And Samson didn't believe God was going to give him water because he didn't see God pouring a pitcher. It's hard to believe. Last week we saw for the Israelites when they were down at the foot of the mountain and Moses was up talking to God. He'd been up there for 40 days, remember? And the Israelites said, "We don't know what's happened to Moses. We don't know what's going on. We're going to lose faith. Let's create other gods. We don't know what's happening here." Because they didn't see God working. So it was hard for them to believe he was. And here, Samson saw what God had just done. He saw that he had just empowered him to fight off these 1,000 men, and yet it was still hard for him to believe God's going to continue working. Sometimes it's hard to have faith. After all, remember, some things are hard to believe. Samson was a man who struggled with having faith. And the story, it just keeps getting better. If you're not convinced yet that Samson was a great role model, just hold on, you will be. The story keeps getting better. He was a man who let lust cause him to fall into sin. So after telling of all these vengeful acts, this moment of showing zero faith, we have another moment of weakness in the life of Samson. In the first verse of chapter 16 of Judges, it says, "One day Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute and went to spend the night with her. Samson's story just keeps getting better and better, doesn't it? He was a broken man. Samson, to put it plainly, was a broken person. And after all of this, though, the Lord was still with Samson. The Lord was still with Samson throughout all of this brokenness. We do see a moment in Samson's life where the Lord leaves him, though. And that moment's coming up next. Samson, later on in his life, decides that he's fallen in love with this woman named Delilah. Now, we all know this Samson and Delilah story, right? Delilah decided to work with the Philistines. She decided that she would convince Samson to tell the secret of his strength so that the Philistines could capture him. Samson was a very proudful man. After who knows how long, months, years, maybe of nagging and nagging from Delilah, finally he says, "My strength is my hair. My hair has never been cut. If you cut it, I will lose my strength." So then, after she has told this, she tells the Philistines, "Tie him up and cut his hair." We see that then he wakes up in Judges 16, verse 20. Delilah calls out, says, "Samson, the Philistines are here." He doesn't realize his hair has been cut at this point. When Samson awoke from his sleep, he thought, listen to what he thought. He thought, "I will escape as I did before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Samson was a proudful man. This was the moment that the Lord left Samson. Because, see, Samson got up, he woke up, and he thought, "I'm going to shake off my chains." He thought, "I'm going to make everything better." Did you wake up this morning and think, "I'm going to break off my chains, I'm going to break off my brokenness"? Or did you wake up this morning and look to God to do it for you? See, that was Samson's problem. Samson woke up and he thought, "I'm going to be able to break free of this." He thought, "I've done it before, I'll do it again." After all, Samson was able to wake up and break free of chains so many times in the past. What would be different now? You know that whole what didn't kill him made him stronger kind of thing? If I've been through it before, I can surely do it now. He did it then, he can do it again. This morning, do you just think that you can wake up tomorrow and shake off your brokenness and keep going about your life like you don't need any other help? Do you think that you're strong enough to wake up and match up with your sin and brokenness and conquer it on your own? Look what happened when Samson forgot that the power he had was from God and not from himself. See, when he thought that he was invincible, things went a little wrong. Sometimes it's critical to remember where our strength comes from. And it doesn't come from us, but from God. Where do you think your strength comes from this morning? Where do you think your blessings come from this morning? Do you realize, and at this point I hope you do, but do you realize that you are just a broken human and everything good comes from God? Or do you think that, "No, I'm a good person"? Or do you think, "No, I'm a good parent aside from God"? Or do you think, "No, I'm a really good"? Do you think highly of yourself? So much so that you don't think God plays any part in your goodness. So that's pride. Matt Proctor, the president of Ozark Christian College, tells a story. It makes me laugh every time I think of it. There's a scripture, pride comes before a fall. In his first ministry, he's preaching at this small church, and he said in his first year they had doubled in size. He had grown this church tremendously. And he said he was out changing the church sign, and he was writing on the sign, "Pride comes before a fall." He said as he was putting this on there, he kept thinking, "Man, I'm doing great things at this church. Man, I've grown this church so much." And he's just thinking so highly of what he's done at this church. He says, as he finishes the sign, he turns around to walk in the church, and he says he trips and falls on his way to the door. And he said he just saw, "God, I see what you did there. I was getting a little prideful, and you tripped me up." This morning, pride comes before a fall, and it did in Samson's case. The pride was, Samson thought, "I can handle my brokenness on my own." Samson thought, I don't need God to fix my situation. You know, yesterday was just fine. I didn't have God then. Tomorrow will be just fine too. And he had this attitude that he didn't need God's strength. This morning, you need to think humbly of yourself. You need to understand that your strength, your power, your goodness, it all comes from God. Without it, you're broken. See, Samson, at the end of his story, begins to realize this. At the end of his story, he realized where his strength came from. So Samson, after his hair's cut, the Lord left him in his pride. He's fallen. The Philistines have taken him. They've gouged out his eyes. They've made him a slave. They're making him do these crazy things. They have him in this temple. And look at what happens. He realized he's still a violent, vengeful, sinful, broken man. But he starts to realize where his strength had come from. In Judges chapter 16, in verse 28, it says, Then Samson called out to the Lord, O Lord God, please remember me. Strengthen me, O God, just once more, so that with one vengeful blow I may pay back the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson reached out for the 2 central pillars supporting the temple, bracing himself against them with his right hand and one on his left hand on the other. Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the lords and all the people in it. So in his death he killed more than he had killed in his entire life. Samson, one more moment, was strengthened by God. And it was because even though he was broken, his brokenness wasn't instantly fixed. I mean, he didn't end up being a perfect man in this moment. God didn't say, okay, now that you've fixed everything and you're perfect, I'll be with you. No. Because he's still vengeful. He's still wanting revenge. He's still saying, let me get revenge for my eyes. He's still a broken man. The difference is he understands his need for God. And he says, God, will you strengthen me? Because without you, I know I'm broken. Without you, I know I'm weak. God used a violent, spiteful, vengeful, once prideful, unclean, law-breaking, sexually immoral person to help and carry out his will. God used this broken soul. These, after all, are God's people. These are the people that have come before us. Eve, how she ate of the fruit she was told not to. Moses, how he murdered the guy he was not supposed to. Samson and all that he has done. These are the guys that came before us. And it's through this man, through Samson, that God began to set the nation of Israel free. And what this shows us is that God's power is enough, despite the weakness of his servant. God is still strong. I'm going to ask you again, what kind of man was Samson? Samson was a broken and sinful man, and a weak man. But he was still a man that was used by and loved by God. See, God doesn't come to work in the lives of the strong, but rather to strengthen those who are weak. And that is our gospel this morning. That when people ask, what kind of man is Cody? When people ask, what kind of man are you? You're going to give them you can give them a list of sinfulness, just like we see in the Samson story. You can say, well, Cody, he's been a prideful man. Cody, he's been this. Or you can substitute your name in there and list some of your sins. You can say, I've been a sinful, a broken person. You can go on with that list of descriptions. But you can say, God is breaking me down, taking away my pride, and making me realize I'm dependent on him and his strength. I have no strength. I am broken, but God is great. Because the reality is Jesus came to die for broken people, for sinners. Jesus came and died for men like us, men like Samson, men like Moses, women like Eve. Men and women who without the strength of God would be too weak for anything. Samson at the end of his life knew where his strength came from. He realized the Lord is who was strengthening him. Sometimes it takes being broken down to realize our need for salvation. To realize that broken people are God's people. In Luke 19, Jesus says, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Jesus came for broken people. This morning, we're all weak sinners. We're all of us here, none of us are better than the other one. All of us here, if we started going through our list of our actions and our lives, they would read something like Samson. I mean, maybe not that much strength. I'm not that strong. I never caught 30 foxes and tied their tails together. But our list would just be a list full of sinful and weak moments, when occasionally we did what was right. We would also see in our story that God was still with us, that God was still trying to save us, that God was still working in our lives, even if we didn't see it. And this morning, as we close, I just want to drive home the point that God's people are broken people. No matter where you're at this morning, no matter what you believe about yourself, no matter what you think your list looks like, your life looks like, God is still working to save you. Now, if you think too highly of yourself, you also need to realize that you are a broken person. Whatever, as we get ready to sing this morning and close our service, whatever decision you need to make, I want you to reflect on your life. Do you realize how broken you are? If you do, you're probably one or two people. You either probably don't realize how broken you are and you're prideful and you think that you don't need any help. If so, you need to start realizing that you need Jesus this morning. Or maybe you're in the other boat and you think, man, I'm too broken. No one can help me. If that's you this morning, you also need to realize that God's people are broken people. God is still with you. Whatever decision you need to make this morning, now's the time to do it.